radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday afternoon. Hope you're all doing well. We have our Q&A today. Both SuperChat is open. I have some questions that were mailed into me. Sound is weird I hear. I think somebody, let me mute you guys. I think it's Jonathan. Jonathan always is not muted. I don't know why I can't mute.
I'm muted for the record.
Because I muted you. You weren't muted before. We could hear everything going on in your place. All right, everybody.
Naughty.
Okay. Thanks for joining us today. So today's an open Q&A. Anything goes. We talk about anything you guys want to. I will start with our contributors and go take their questions one by one. And then if there are any Super Chat questions, we will take the Super Chat questions after I do one round, and we'll do as many rounds as is necessary to fill the hour and a half. We'll see how many questions you guys have. Okay, I'm going to ask questions based on how you appear on my screen. So we will start with Reed. Hi, Reed. You're muted. You're muted.
Okay, I am muted.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Oh, okay, I sent one in. Should I just read that one?
Yeah, just read that one.
Okay. Well, the first one was, will you and Amy be discussing the Parler.com situation in the near future? And then I added, if Parler.com was taken down for inciting Capitol Hill riot, I wonder why Facebook and YouTube didn't suffer a similar fate.
Yes, I don't know when. I'm sure one day Amy and I will be discussing it. You know, she is employed by Parler, so it does put her in a tricky situation. So we'll have to see when that happens. But I'm sure one day we'll talk about it. I don't have anything planned right now. She hasn't asked me, so I don't want to encourage her in any kind of way. I just want to see how this plays out. So
she went on Fox a couple of times. I didn't.
Yeah, but she goes on Fox representing the company. I mean, if she comes on my show, I don't want her representing the company. I want her to be able to represent Amy. It's not exactly the same thing, right? So she told me she's done. I think one day we were exchanging texts, and she said she had just done 7 or 8 interviews. So she's doing lots and lots of interviews. But again, I'd rather have an open discussion with her about all the different issues, and I'll wait until things settle down a little bit before that happens. In terms of why the others have not suffered any consequences, well, I think it's fairly obvious. I mean, the others are big. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to YouTube? I mean, YouTube is Google. Who's going to go after YouTube, or who's going to go after Facebook? Facebook, first of all, doesn't use Amazon servers, so Amazon can't go after them because they use their own servers. So is Apple or Google going to take down the Facebook app? No way are they taking down the Facebook app, right? So, you know, size matters in business. And if you want to make a point, it's much easier to go after the small guy, the less established guy. You know, I also think that, you know, I don't know, but it seems to me that if you pointed out to Facebook, look, these guys incited the January 6th, they would immediately take down those posts because that's their policy. Parler, I don't know if they took down the post. The claim is they did not. So I think that's part of the issue. But look, it matters who you're dealing with. And again, there's nobody to take down Facebook because Facebook uses their own cloud services. It strikes me as strange after what happened to Gab which was taken down by why Parler, who knew they were going to be in the crosshairs, why they would use Amazon and why not use something that protected them from being taken down. There are ways to do it. It seems like bad business decision making. All right. Thank you, Reed. Daniel.
Hey, Yaron. I continue to go back through some of your older shows. I'm back into 2019, really enjoying them, especially any of the interviews you did with someone who's either at the Institute or used to be at the Institute. Really good. I also enjoyed the ones with Gad Saad. You know, I mean, he's not an objectivist, but he's intellectually very honest and engaging personality. I thought those were really great interviews.
Good. I thought you were going to say, I've listened to some of your old shows and oh my God, you were wrong.
You are so much better now than back then.
There you
go. No, my question, as far as I know, Ayn Rand said something that I've never heard anyone else say. And that is that man's moral code, I'm saying it backwards, that his motive power is his moral code. And I can see how with his values and his moral code, to extend the train analogy, you can choose to go to the left, choose to go to the right, or choose to fill your engine with sand and close your eyes and hope for the best. How is your moral code more than that? How is it the thing driving you forward, your motive power?
Well, it shapes every decision you make. And once you're committed to your morality, once you're committed to your moral values, it is a clarifier and a motivator to stick to those moral values. I mean, think about, I mean, I don't know that I have a definitive answer, but think about, I did a show on pride not that long ago. I think about what pride guides you. It provides you with the motivation to strive to be morally perfect, to follow your morality without compromise, without exception. And, you know, that is a driver to live life in a particular way, in a you know, with particular values. And I think given that it's all focused on happiness, on the moral purpose, which is happiness, what could be a greater driver? What could be a greater motivator than knowing that by sticking to these principles, you're achieving happiness, that these principles are guiding you towards it, and that they are efficacious, they're connected to reality, following them will lead to success and perfection as possible. So I think all of that integrated serves as an engine, as a motivation. I want to be happy. I want to be successful. I want to live the best life that I can live. And my morality is my guide to doing all of that.
You know, one of the examples I thought of, I don't know if this applies, but in Atlas Shrugged, Hank Rearden has just been skewered by these directives, and what is he going to do? And what about the day when he thought about how to make the bridge? Wait a minute, that's all crap. There's a much better way to do this. Let me call up Dagny and tell her there's so much better way. And she's crying almost, thanking him for doing what he's doing. And it just seemed to be an application of that it was his way of facing the world anyway that drove him forward, despite the fact that he'd just been skewered by all these directives, these regulations.
Yeah, because none of that matters, because his focus on reality is his focus on success, is his focus on moving his life and whatever he's working on forward. That is what matters. Nothing else really fundamentally matters. They're all just mosquito bites versus the opportunity to live life to its fullest. So yes, that he's committed to reality. He's committed to his project. He's committed to productiveness, and everything else is irrelevant to that. And that's what drives him. That's what motivates him. That's what inspires him. And that's what leads him to live a successful life.
Thank you.
Vitali. Am I saying that right?
Yes. Can you hear me?
You have to speak up a little bit. It's hard to hear you.
I wrote in
Whoops, I can't hear you.
chat.
Try again?
Can you read in the chat?
Yes,
Chat.
yes, you wrote something in the chat. Okay. Hi, Ron, I can't speak because my wife is sleeping. Okay, sorry about that. My question is, should businessmen deviate from principle because of governments? For example, you are Bill Gates or other successful businessmen, and they can't stay on top without being pragmatic and playing some dirty games. Remember Microsoft's story. Losing your company and money seems not practical, as well as losing your soul. Well, it depends on which principles, right? So yes, certainly because of government, you're going to act differently. You can't do things the way you would like to do them. It's really an issue of, how far you're willing to go, right? So, Microsoft didn't want to lobby. It didn't want to spend money in Washington. It didn't want to, in a sense, play that game. But once the regulators came after them, they had really no choice. Survival required them to spend the money on Washington. Unfortunately, then there's that slippery slope that once you start that, then they start using their lobbying to suppress the ability of their competitors to compete. I don't think you have to go that far. You shouldn't go that far. I think it really does you damage when you go that far. But there's certain things that you need to do. You need to protect yourself, so how far you go is a very difficult, it's a very difficult line to draw. John Allison, when he was CEO of BB&T, certain things, he drew a line in the sand and said, I'm not doing that. But when the government basically threatened him, he took a bailout, not because he wanted one, not because he requested one, but because the bureaucrats told him, if you don't, there are going to be dire consequences to your bank. And given that you're a CEO of a publicly traded company, you have to figure out what long-term is best for your shareholders, how to maximize their wealth. So those are the kind of, particularly for a publicly traded company, the well-being of your shareholders has to weigh heavily on any decisions that you make. And and of course you have to think long-term, but government makes it very difficult for you to think long-term because you don't know what crazy thing they're going to come up with tomorrow to try to control you, to try to do something. And the fact that you gave in today will then encourage them to come after you more tomorrow, less tomorrow. It just goes on and on and on. But the principle here is you have to, as long as your moral principles are not being violated, you have to do what's going to be in the benefit of your shareholders. And when you reach the day where you cannot do that, where you cannot work at the company, benefit shareholders without completely compromising your moral principles, then it's time to retire, resign, switch professions, do something else. But it's really, really, really hard. And government puts businessmen into a very, very, very hard position. And that's why it's very easy to criticize CEOs or people who work for companies, but it's very tricky and difficult to be in that situation. Okay, Jonathan.
Hi, Yaron. Quickly, I want to give a shout out to Dr. Peikoff. Before the Yaron Brook Show, you were a guest host on the Leonard Peikoff podcast. And I encourage everyone to listen to you on those shows. And frankly, to Dr. Peikoff shows before you, Yaron, because as you remember, he specifically did not talk about politics. And one of the wonderful things about Dr. Peikoff's podcast was that it was everything but politics. And people should really salute his brilliance in that form.
Yeah, he really brought me on board to do the politics section because he didn't want to do it anymore. So he But yes, he did these podcasts. He didn't talk about politics at all. And of course, you can go even further back and listen to his radio shows from the 90s, which were just brilliant, just brilliant. So yes, we all wish Dr. Peikoff well as he recovers from COVID.
I wanted to ask you about Russia. I remember reading the story that when Ayn Rand was leaving Russia, she told the story of someone telling her, quote, if they ask you in America, tell them that Russia is a huge cemetery and that we are all dying slowly. You might remember that quote.
Yep.
And just seeing some of the headlines, it seems like hasn't changed in 100 years. I've been reading about Putin's fortune that he's stolen, the protests and the violence in the street there. So what's your take on Russia and the Russian culture that you've seen?
Hi. So it's bad in Russia, but let's not confuse it with Stalin and Lenin's and the communist Russia. I mean, things are much, much better today than they were back then. Certainly, you've got an authoritarian in power, Vladimir Putin. He's been in power for a long time now. He's basically changed the Russian constitution to allow him to stay in power for as long as he wants. There used to be kind of a term limit there, but that is gone. Funnily enough, he's quite popular in Russia, or has been, at least in the past. So even though there are demonstrations now, and there is a growing opposition to him, and there's demonstration right now because the opposition leader who Putin's agents tried to murder is back in Russia, and when he landed, he was arrested immediately, and so there are demonstrations now to try to free him. So there isn't any real freedom in Russia, but there's, it's all in this sense, it's relative. It's a lot more freedom than there was back in communist Russia, and fewer people are dying. When Ayn Rand left Russia, it was a cemetery. People were dying. People were starving. Ukraine, during that period, a little bit after she left in the early 1930s, about 40 million people died of starvation in Ukraine. Not to mention the millions of people who died in the gulags, the millions of political prisoners that died. Putin's Russia is not quite as bad, even though it is bad. And Putin is an authoritarian, an ambitious authoritarian who wants and is trying to solidify his power over there. But, Rand always said that Russia was hopeless in the sense that Russian culture, she believed, was so mystical, essentially mystical. Not mystical in for any particular religion, but essentially mystical, superstitious and anti-reason, that even when communism would fall, they wouldn't establish kind of a individualistic culture because their mysticism wouldn't allow that. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw communism fall in Russia once it fell, they went into, to a large extent, a state of kind of anarchy where the government did nothing to protect property rights and allowed oligarchs to just basically take over and steal, property from people and basically dominate through force, not through competition, but through force, the Russian economy. And that is viewed by people, by the way, this is one of as Russia's capitalist period. This is the period Russia was capitalist, and look what happened. The oligarchs took over, but of course it wasn't. It was a period in which the capitalism assumes the protection of property rights. And when you don't protect property rights, violence happens, bad things happens, and you get the distortions that you have today. So I think it's that, Russians are still quite mystical. They're superstitious. They want a leader to tell them what to think and tell them what to do. Unfortunately, they love Putin because he's strong. He's energetic. He stands up to the West. He tells them what to do. So until Russia changes its culture, it turns away from mysticism towards reason, unfortunately, it's hopeless. Now, I think that with the greater exposure to the West, I think with the greater penetration of Western ideas into Russia, over time, the culture has a chance of changing. But here again, when they look at the United States and look at how pathetic we are, they don't necessarily want to become us. Same problem we have with China. When America was a shining city on the hill, that provided real inspiration and motivation for freedom fighters all over the world. As the United States has declined into a more and more of a mystical, mixed economy with leaders who are authoritarian-like, the more the United States becomes that, the less of an inspiration it can be for the rest of the world. Now, I've been to Russia. How many times have I been to Russia? I think twice, maybe 3. I've been to St. Petersburg and I've been to Moscow. I did not like Moscow. Moscow felt to me oppressive, dark. I didn't like it. And I mean, in Moscow, I was in a mall. So it's interesting. Red Square, which is associated with communism and everything, Red Square is adjacent to Red Square is this massive mall, very Western kind of mall. And you go into the mall and there's a guy dressed up like Stalin and people pay him money to get pictures taken with him. I mean, God, that is insane. Stalin, who killed tens of millions of Russians. So it's a very strange country. I like St. Petersburg more, but and I met a lot of freedom supporters of freedom in both Moscow and St. Petersburg. But the dominant thing, particularly among business people in Russia, is pragmatism. They just want to get along. They just want to somehow survive. They don't want to stir the pot. They don't, Putin is good because he provides order, and they value order because it allows them to make money. Right? So it's that kind of mentality, and it's very tragic and very unfortunate because very productive people, very smart people, and yet the pragmatism and the mysticism. Pragmatism is a response to mysticism. Mysticism is not efficacious in the world. And if you want to be efficacious in the world, then you reject all idealism and you become a pragmatist. And that, of course, is also a dead end because it means you never fight for long-term principles and you let the authoritarians and the mystics dominate all.
Well, I'll just say you've been all around the world. I haven't, but there's a few countries I know I would never go to: Cuba, North Korea, Saudi Arabia. And for me, I have more miles than I know what to do with, but I would never go to Russia. No interest in even stepping foot there.
So I'm sympathetic to that view. Of all the countries in the world, I wasn't eager to go to Russia. I went to Russia because I was invited and an opportunity to speak. And you know me, I almost never turn those down. But I get it. And of all the countries going in, I was most worried about going into Russia. Like, I've been to China many times. Now, I wouldn't go to China right now, but I've been to China many times. Never feared, even when I knew that the think tank I was speaking for was being hounded by thugs and being watched by the security forces. I don't know. There's something about China I really like among the people, the atmosphere, the energy. Yeah, I don't like Russia. And I wouldn't, I'd go back to speak to bring them the message that I bring them, but I wouldn't, I'm not eager to go back. I love so many of the places I go to. Russia's not one of my favorites.
Thanks again for all you do.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. All right, let's see. 917, area code 917. You can put your name in the field.
Hey, Yaron, it's Andrew.
Hey, Andrew, that's right. Andrew always has a phone number.
I always mess up the name part. Wow, which question do I want to ask you? So, okay. Ayn Rand talked about how a creative man is not motivated by the desire to beat others. He's motivated by the desire to achieve. And she made that point a few times pretty strenuously, kind of against like this very hyper competitive mindset. And in business, I have noticed that, there are business people I work with when they're really motivated by competition with others. And some of them are actually kind of effective, but they're probably not as effective as they could be. But they do seem relatively unhappy and kind of angry a lot of the time. And I wanted to see, as I'm trying to like integrate the point, I mean, do you see, obviously competition could be in any area of life, but do you see a healthy role for competition?
Sure. I think
in terms of motivation?
Yeah, I do. Certainly, look, there's certain fields in life where competition is essential. Sports, for example, right? It is about winning. It's about being the number one. It doesn't count to come in second. It's particularly when you're a professional, particularly when this is what you do. The essence of sport is not just to be good. The essence of sport is to win. So, when you see somebody like Usain Bolt, the runner, or Muhammad Ali, right? The boxer who would, and I don't like boxing, but Muhammad Ali, who would talk about how good he was and he was the best, and being the best was important to him and motivating him. I think that has value. So because of the nature of the sport is zero sum. There's a winner and there's a loser. Business is not. So I think that in business, while some sense competition can make you better, what are they doing? What are they seeing I'm not seeing? How are my competitors making more money than me? How are they bringing out products faster than me? All of that is information. It's valuable information. It's valuable insight. It's how a good business person functions. But in terms of being the best, here the best is not necessarily at somebody else's expense. It's not at somebody else's expense. Here the best means I want to be the best that I can be. I want to be the best company producing, achieving my particular mission statement, the best that is possible to me. The competitors might provide me with information, might provide me with even motivation in a particular area, but the core motivation of a great businessman is excellence. And this is the difference between, it's motivation by love. And this is, I think, what makes great businessmen and great human beings generally is motivation by love. I do this because I love doing it. I want to be successful at it because I love what I do, and I love the feeling of achieving my values. And I want to achieve it because I want to be happy. I want to be successful. I want to gain what it is that I want to gain. I want to be the best that I can be in this field of my life. That is the proper motivation. And generally in life, people are motivated by love. And look, even in sports, if you don't love what you do, competition is not going to be enough. So we know a lot of people who win but are miserable because they don't really love what they do. They're not happy doing what they're doing. The winning is not enough. So people like the reason I mentioned Muhammad Ali and Usain Bolt is they both brag about being the best. They love winning, but they seem to be having a blast doing it, right? They love what they do. And look, what they do is hard. The training is unbelievably hard. The idea that these people just are born with the right genes is absurd once you look at the kind of training regimens any one of these great athletes go through. So if they don't love the process and they don't love what they do, it's not. So ultimately, it's motivation by love. In some areas in life, competition is important. In some areas, it's not, or less important. The driver ultimately has to be your love of what you do and your interest in being successful at it.
Yeah, that's really good. I wonder if also that there seems to be a distinction in like having fun with competition as kind of an existential thing versus competing for self-esteem with another person.
Yes.
And
I think people who compete for self-esteem. I mean, even there, I mean, look, if you saw the Michael Jordan documentary, you saw that to him, winning was definitely a part of it, right? He needed to win. He had to win, and he was not tolerant of people who held him back. So, but I don't think his fundamental self-esteem was gained from winning. It was from being the best, and it's from being as good as he could be.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Andrew.
Right.
John. You're muted, John. Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. In the next decade, do you see Islamic terrorism becoming less of a problem than it's been in the past?
I mean, it's hard to tell. I definitely think that there are forces in the Middle East right now that are, trying to suppress and trying to move us away from Islamic terrorism. Primarily, in Saudi Arabia, we've got, an authoritarian, the Crown Prince, MLB, MBL, and some MB something, who is trying to secularize, trying to modernize, trying to move away from supporting the Wahhabis with no limit, trying to move away from the kind of the deal that Saudi Arabia has had with the terrorists, MBS is his name, with the terrorists since 1979, when they cut a deal with the Wahhabis and basically gave the Wahhabis free reign. And out of that really came bin Laden and everything else. So I think they've reined that in partially because they realize that oil is not going to be their path to success forever, that they need to diversify the economies. And for that, they need Western help, including Israel's help. It's one of the reasons why all these little countries have got peace deals or normalization with Israel. And you're seeing the same with Dubai, and you're seeing the same with the Arab Emirates and these other places, is a real movement to stop or to reduce support for the fundamentalists and to move more, very, very slowly, granted, towards more secular, towards more openness to the West, towards more gaining values from the West. Now, the real question is that sustainable, right? Without an actual commitment and understanding of what they're doing, a commitment to reason. And it's hard to tell, particularly over a period of a decade, because these things can take many decades in terms of how they move. ISIS has been crushed. Al Qaeda, basically, to a large extent, in the Middle East at least, has been crushed. Neither one are significant forces short term, and that is because the United States and many of these Arab countries, did what they did to them. So I think there's a chance, there's a good chance that terrorism will decline, will stay low. It's been low for the last few years and will stay low in relative terms. But you never know. There could be a bubbling up. It could be a few terrorist attacks. It could be for a year or two. It could be 5 years. It's hard to tell. But I think if I had a bet right now, I'd say that the next decade will see less terrorist activity than the previous decade. There are a lot of other conflicts going on in the Middle East that have more urgency for the countries there. The Shiite-Sunni split has become deeper. Al-Qaeda was really supported by both Sunni and Shiites. The Muslim Brotherhood, which was the main power in Egypt, and really the fountainhead of all Sunni terrorists, the fountainhead of Al-Qaeda and of ISIS. The Muslim Brotherhood used to be agnostic between Sunni and Shiite. So Iran used to help Al-Qaeda and used to help. That has changed. The Sunni Shiite split is now deeper. And the enemy is now Iran, and the Sunnis are suppressing the radical elements within because they see this enemy from without, which is Iran. I was going to say one other thing. And of course, there are battles going on in Yemen, in Syria, and in Iraq, and in Lebanon, right? Between Sunni and Shiites. That's what the wars are going on right now. The violence you're seeing is Sunni Shiite violence in all those countries. And that's what everybody's focused on. So given all of that, I think over the next decade, you'll see a decline. Now, longer term, it really depends. It depends what happens to Turkey. Turkey is moving towards more radical, has been for the last few decades. But will that sustain? Will the forces, is Erdogan the future of Turkey, or is Erdogan already passé? Hard to tell. What happens in Saudi Arabia? Does Saudi Arabia really make this transition towards, being more friendly towards the West internally? And then what happens in Iran? I mean, that's the big question. What happens in Iran? And my long-term thought has always been, hope has always been that there would be a revolution in Iran. I still hope for that. It never seems to actually materialize, which is kind of sad, and for the Iranians more than anybody else. But those are the factors. What happens in Iran and what happens in Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Those are the key countries right now. Everything else is just them battling out and jockeying for positions. I think Turkey's worried about all these Sunni countries becoming friendly with Israel. Turkey used to be very friendly with Israel and has moved away from Israel, but now sees all these other countries, and it's afraid that it is missing out. So how it positions itself, it's going to be, it'll be interesting. And then, of course, the United States. What does the United States do? Does it continue to support Turkey as it becomes more radical? It's a member of NATO, right? But I see the Islamic threat somewhat in decline in the short run, hard to tell in the long run.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Let's see. And by the way, there are some good Muslim by religion intellectuals who are arguing for a moderate Islam. And I know there are people out there who don't believe there is such a thing as moderate Islam. But it's like moderate Christianity. It's a bringing in of Western values into the Muslim world and still staying religious, but really not taking the holy books too seriously, which is what Christians do and what Jews do. And I think that's possible. And I think there have been some Muslims who've been doing that kind of work. Oh, I want to mention one other thing. This is the thought I had that disappeared before. One of the things that have discouraged Islamic terrorism is the failure of the Arab Spring, right? The Arab Spring looked like it was going to bring Islamic regimes to the government of country after country after country after country, which would be allied with the Muslim terrorists. And of course, the big country that they hoped to capture was Egypt. And for a while, they had Egypt. And then, of course, that collapsed. The Egyptians turned against them. And suddenly they realized that they're not that they're probably not going to win the Arab Spring. And that has decreased the motivation for radicalization because they really saw victory. And in a sense, it was snatched out of their hands. And when that happened, I think that very much demoralized the radicals within the Muslim world. All right, Emmanuel, if I'm pronouncing that right.
I was actually about to ask you the same thing. I heard Jonathan pronounce your name Yaron. I've always pronounced your name Yaron.
You're right. You're right. Jonathan's wrong, but I can't hear the differences anymore unless somebody points it out. So I don't correct anybody.
Yeah, Emmanuel is spot on. First time on the AMA, and I really had wanted to thank you for a couple of specific things that you've done for me personally, and just being an audience member. One is this thing that you've been repeatedly saying of surrounding yourself with great art, that in a world in which we're fixated on politics, find beautiful things to surround yourself with. And I largely ignored that until a couple of months, 2 or 3 months ago, and made a concerted effort to find beautiful pieces of art. And it's hard. I mean, it's not easy. But man, you're absolutely right. It makes a world of difference. I found some really exquisite, beautiful pieces of music that I listen to, and poetry, stuff that had it not been for your coaxing, I wouldn't have put in the effort to go find it. So thank you for that.
Good. I'm really happy to hear that.
For sure. And the second part is that I wanted to thank you for is your defense of finance. I am founder of a VC-backed startup here in San Francisco, and I tell you what, like without venture capital, our journey would have been so much more difficult. The courage it takes to be a venture capitalist, to cut a check to this kid from Ethiopia who just has a dollar and a dream, to give us the runway, breathing room, to hire people to invest in R&D. It would have taken us 10 years to get to where we are today if it weren't for the miracle of venture capital. And it bums me out to see, especially here in the Valley, VCs being so derided and maligned when they provide such the lifeblood of technological innovation and really the gas that fuels it. So thank you for your defense of it.
Sure. Absolutely. And venture capital is the easiest of all the financiers to defend. And yet even they are derided, right? When their benefit is so obvious, should be so obvious.
Yeah. But yeah, just like I said, first time on, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm the guy spamming you in the super chats with a bunch of donations. So
I see you once in a while. That's great. That's great. So
thank you very much.
A question? Well, that's okay. That's it.
No, I just wanted to say thank you.
Good. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, Roy. Last but not least.
Certainly not least. No, anyhow, before I get to the question, I got to commend you for yesterday's program on the regulatory state and COVID and its disastrous effect on it. I think it's brilliant. The structure, the material you covered, so clear, beautifully organized. Has Christian yet made that a package? The whole rant? Would you call it a rant?
I think he's made one section of it a shorter video. So one of them is there. He'll probably make another one out of that content. But yeah, I hope people share it because it's the kind of content that really needs to get out there. It's the kind of content that's not objectivist specific, and therefore I think would appeal to a broad audience. And I think that people could relate to it because it's not rocket science.
No, absolutely not. Because I want to share it with a number of ordinary people. Well, they're not ordinary because they're my friends, but ordinary people who are not objectivist centric. But yeah, terrific. My question involves deplatforming and freedom of speech. Yeah. Have you heard of a fellow called Mike Masnick?
No.
Okay. I hadn't heard of him until a few days ago when I saw, I think it was on YouTube, an interview he did with Nick Gillespie from Reason Magazine.
Yeah. Now,
Mike Masnick, about over 20 years ago, created a blog called Tech Dirt. And he's founder and CEO of the Copia Institute. His interests are technology, particularly as it relates to freedom of speech, privacy, and business issues and legal issues confronting technology. Okay. Happily, he seems to be on the right track. And I don't know what he knows about objectivism, but what I heard was good. When he uses the word censorship, he means he limits it to government control. Yeah. So that's refreshing right off the bat. And he very much supports Section 230. In fact, he advocates expanding it to provide better protection for intellectual property rights, better than the Digital Millennium Copyright Act does. Okay. So he seems to be really on the right track. Now, here's where I get to my question. I've heard you advocate that platforms formally publish their standards and their criteria so that users would know oh, this I better not do. Now, he took a different position. He said that the practices that the different platforms follow, the decisions they make when they moderate their content, the content, is very much context specific.
Mhm.
And he thought it was impossible to actually come out with rules that wouldn't have to keep changing based on the specific. And I thought, well, that sounded legitimate, sensible. But I also thought that it might be possible to state their rules in terms of principles that would not have to be changed, rather than make them very specific. You may not say this, but you may not say anything that would, in our sole judgment, cause such and such. For example, now he's actually taken this. So I'd like, part A is I'd like your opinion of that. Part B is he wrote an article in 2019 for the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University. And it's titled Protocols, Not Platforms, a Technological Approach to Free Speech. I haven't read it yet, and I guess you haven't either because you weren't familiar with him. I can send you a link to the article because I'd be interested. Yeah, I'll email it to you. I'd be interested in hearing what you think because it sounds like he's taking it to another step, trying to find a solution when solutions are tough. Everyone, every good person agrees that the government has no role to play.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean it's still easy. So I'll shut up now and let you comment.
So I think the important thing to note here is that whatever the solution is, it's very difficult to get to. And I have a lot of sympathy for Facebook and for Twitter and for others who are trying to figure out what the balance is. Now, I think they're biased, and I think they ignore their bias because they live in a bubble where they don't know that not everybody thinks like they do. But no matter what philosophical perspective you have, to try to write up a code that is objective is going to be hard. And I don't have the solution of what it is. And it would have to be a series of principles that could then be adapted to various contexts. So there's no question that a lot of what you say, its meaning is contextual, and whether it violates the terms of service is contextual or not. So so that is all I think absolutely right. But I don't think that precludes being able to have a set of principles that can guide you. And it's important for a content creator to know, well, what is crossing the line with these guys? What can I say? What can't I say? What can I do? What can't I do? We talk about the importance of having objective laws. And I think the same thing is true here. Less so, of course, laws are more important because the government can actually use force against you. But just from a business perspective, it's crucial, to keep your clientele to have clear rules, clear guidelines, clear principles that allow you to determine. But it's hard. So I was on a call the other day with, it was a private call, so I'm not going to tell you exactly who it was, but two people on the call were people responsible for content curation at two of the largest social media platforms in the world. And, they were, I'd say both of them were probably mildly left of center. They weren't rabid progressives. One of them said she used to be a Republican and she's not anymore, but she's not a wacko either. And the thing that came across from having just a discussion with them is that they are really struggling with how to do this and how to do it right. And what constitutes inciting, now put aside the legal definition, but what constitutes for their purposes inciting, what constitutes the kind of speech they don't want on their platform. And they are struggling. They don't know. I think that's true of Zuckerberg. I think that's true of, I don't know if you saw the internal memos at Twitter around whether to take Trump off the platform or not. And there was massive disagreement about whether to do it or not. The CEO, I forget his name, The CEO didn't want to take Trump off. He wanted to keep Trump on. And his people argued that he should be taken off. And there's a whole exchange. And then he does a whole stream on Twitter to try to explain why they did it, why he accepted his staff overruling him in a sense. These are difficult decisions from a business perspective, difficult decisions to make and try to stay consistent. I don't think they do necessarily a good job at it, but I appreciate the difficulty that they face in doing it. And I think Republicans and some objectivists and many libertarians are way too dismissive. Oh, they should just allow all speech on. I remember when Jordan Peterson was trying to create his own platform about a year ago before he got sick. He was trying to create a competitor to Facebook. And I heard this from Dave Rubin, I think. And Dave was telling me that the real challenge that they were facing was not technical. It wasn't even marketing. The real challenge they were facing is how to create terms of service that would allow a maximum of speech, but wouldn't allow everybody. They don't want everybody. They don't want all speech, because some speech would make the platform non-desirable to be on. For example, pornographic speech, right? People just wouldn't want to be on. So how do you set the guidelines? How do you set the limits is not an easy problem. And people are way too quick to criticize and to make fun of and to trivialize what's involved here. And I think Parler's struggles are part of their difficulty in figuring out exactly what is and isn't appropriate to have on their platform. And I think they would admit that some of the stuff that landed up on the platform shouldn't have been there. And then the question is, how do you police that? So this is a very complicated issue that one of the beauties of markets is that different players do it differently and over time, and maybe it takes a decade. The market kind of figures out, motivates the right set, the set that actually has stable and is workable. And part of that is different companies have different standards and push and pull and all of that happens in a marketplace. Now, the problem we face today is that government is involved, and that's what distorts and perverts the whole thing. But if just markets were working on this problem, we would solve it. Given the government's involved, that's where it gets challenging.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Roy.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks.
All right, let me take a couple of Super Chat questions here. The ones that put up $50 to ask. Okay. Does the Republican establishment think they lost because of Trumpism or because of COVID? I worry the country likes Trumpism and would vote for it again. It's just that any administration in power during COVID was going to lose. Well, I don't think every administration in power over COVID was going to lose. I think there was plenty of ways administration in power over during COVID could have come out heroes. They could have turned this into a huge success story. They could have, they could have stood out in the world as being successful in dealing with COVID. I think Trump, because he was Trump, partially because he's Trump, failed at COVID. He failed in dramatic fashion. He failed both operationally, managerially, and in his communication. Even when some of the things he was saying about COVID were true, he communicated it badly. But the broader question is, is the country a Trumpist country in terms of everything else that Trump stands for? And I think to a large extent, the answer is yes. I think that the country supports tariffs. I think that the country wants more central planning, not less, while at the same time pretending that they're pro-capitalism. I think most of the country is on that issue right of center. I think the country is fed up with politicians and fed up with elites and fed up with the intellectuals. They feel betrayed by the intellectuals. They feel betrayed by the elites. So the country's fed up with what Trump called the swamp. I think the country's basically anti-capitalist, but wants to think of themselves as pro-capitalist. That's the left of center. They're not really left of center. That's the centrists, right? I think they are troubled. A big chunk of the country is troubled by hates the left and hates the particularly the far left, and is willing to vote pretty much for anybody if they think the far left is going to take control. So yes, I very much think that Trumpism is alive and well. The country's also, I think, tired of ideology. So think of the ideologies that they're exposed to. They're exposed to socialism, which they despise, and they're exposed to conservatism, which is an empty suit, and they know it, and it's always failed, and it's always brought nothing. So I think people liked Trump's pragmatism, Trump's non-committal to principles. I think what they didn't like is Trump. And this is what I said throughout this time, that the real danger is a future much more charismatic, idealistic, but who frames it outside of the context of the ideals that Americans have rejected, conservatism, socialism. Not that conservatism is really an ideal, but it's presented as such. That's the real danger, that the collectivist stuff, the status stuff, Americans like that. Americans want that. I mean, what was unpopular that Trump did in terms of actual policies? Very little in terms of actual stuff that was unpopular. I mean, yeah, I think what was mostly unpopular was Trump, was his character and the way he held himself and the way he spoke and his attitude. So yes, I'm very worried about the continuation of Trump's more statist and more collectivist policies. I think they have a home on the right, and it will only become a bigger and stronger home, unfortunately. I don't see any movement out there for more free markets among Republicans. It's just, I don't think that even exists, right? Let's see. Who would yearn for totalitarianism? Spend their entire intellectual career fighting for that world? Well, first, people don't, I mean, I don't know who you're talking about. So is it that you're talking about the people who want to be totalitarian, or are you talking about the common people? I think commoners don't yearn for totalitarianism. They yearn for an authoritarian who will tell them what to do and make their life better somehow. They yearn for not having the responsibility of thinking for themselves. They yearn for not having the responsibility of pursuing their own values. They yearn for being told what to do. The pure second-handers. And what they want is a philosopher king to organize life for them. You know, people who want, the people who like arranged marriages still to this day, because the whole romance thing is overrated. It's hard. Choices, you have to choose, you have to date, you have to do all this stuff, and you're probably going to make a mistake. You know, your parents are smart. They know a lot. They're philosopher kings. They can choose for you. Why not whole cultures still have that, right? People don't want to think for themselves. They're the ones who want authoritarianism, and they never view it as, it's going to be totalitarian. They're going to be in every aspect of my life. They're going to control everything that they do. They lie to themselves and they pretend, it's only going to be the good stuff. I'll only get the good decisions. I won't, I'll still have some freedom. And they lie to themselves. People who lived under the Soviet Union. There are people who lived under the Soviet Union who are who miss those good old days. And all they remember are the things that you could conceivably miss. Mainly that they didn't have to think about which brand of toilet paper to buy. There was only one brand and it was easy, right? Or they didn't have to think about where their paycheck was going to come tomorrow because the state provided. And they don't want to think about anything else. They don't, at the time they hated it, but they forget that and they don't want to think about that. Now they hate what they hate now. So that's the kind of people who strive towards authoritarianism. And then the people who actually advocate for it and fight for it and devote their life to it either want to be rulers out of hatred, or they, again, have convinced. Think about Andre, right? In We the Living. They somehow have bought into the idea that this is good, that the greater good is being served. Particularly if they come from a tough background where they don't always think the world is being just to them. They want to bring justice to the world, and they view this as a path to do that. They're evading, but the others are the nihilists who hate and just want to crush and destroy. Okay, let's do another round. Let's start with John.
How do you see our relations with China over the next few years? Not just economic, but there's the South China Sea, there's Taiwan, other areas where we might come into conflict.
Well, yes. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for conflict. And I think we're going to live through a number of years of very tense, suspenseful kind of real tension between the two countries. And as long as China chooses to become more authoritarian, that tension will continue. But on the other hand, I think China, I have a very counter view of China. I think China's weak. I don't think China wants to go to war with the United States. I think the last thing she can afford is to lose a war, right? He would lose power. And I don't think they can afford a war. China is not rich, not when you consider they have 1.4, 1.3, 1.4 billion people. So, for example, China will test. So, again, I'll say something that people don't agree with, but I think the Chinese figured out that Trump was weak. So they went after Hong Kong. And basically they took Hong Kong, not by military force. They never sent in the troops to suppress the demonstrations. Notice that, right? They were patient. They waited. They waited for the time. They saw the weakness in America over COVID. They saw the political strife. They saw that Trump didn't really care about Hong Kong, that he cared much more about whatever he cared about. And so they slowly chipped away at it to the point where today there's no political freedom in Hong Kong, right? It's just gone. And we never even noticed. They just did it in a way without tanks, without the troops. A few days ago, they tested Biden. They flew, they sent their military airplanes into Taiwanese airspace in a significant show of force to intimidate the Taiwanese. And the only reason they did it is to see what Biden would do. Now, I think Biden should have been a lot stronger. I don't think Biden has done anything near enough. But Biden did send in an aircraft carrier and its accompanying cruisers and everything else into the South China Sea to basically send to China a message and conveyed a message publicly that we still hold to the treaty with Taiwan, and we view this as an aggression against the United States, and be careful, and so on. Now, you could be a lot tougher than that, and I would have been over Hong Kong. But at least America responded. At least we did something. And I think that'll put the Chinese back on their heels a little bit. They'll wait for another opportune moment of weakness to strike. I don't expect a war between China and the United States unless the U.S. tumbles. So imagine if we get stagflation, if there's real strife in American streets, there's real political instability, there's real problems, then I can see China invading Taiwan and taking the risk. But as long as America's still on its feet and what they, then I think China will hold back because it's afraid.
Thank you.
All right, I just want to thank, and I'm going to butcher his name, Webjon for Norway, who's just contributed. I don't know. I can't do the I don't know how much, 5,000 Norwegian krona, which I think is like $500 or something like that. So thank you. Wow, that's incredibly generous. And I love the fact that you are enjoying the show and getting real value out of the show. $587.77 before YouTube does its conversions. But yes, so that's a lot of money. Thank you. All right, let's see. I'm just going to go by the order you're in on my screen right now. So Roy, we're back to you.
Goody. Okay. Some film indeed, some TV series recommendations. First, another South Korean series. Last time I recommended, and still do, Misaeng. This one is called Crash Landing on You.
Yeah, I've seen that on Netflix. I haven't seen the show yet. I started watching it and didn't really get into it.
Well, I would suggest maybe giving it a little more time.
Okay, yeah, I always do that. Right?
Yeah, no, depends how many episodes you've seen.
I just saw the first one. I don't think I saw more than the first one.
Oh, no. Oh. No, it does. It does develop.
Okay.
It does develop.
Good.
And some of it is, just for the readers, it's about a South Korean heiress and entrepreneur who goes paragliding.
Yep.
And a storm takes her over North Korean territory, and she crash lands right on top of a North Korean captain in the North Korean army. And he decides to, well, you haven't seen anything beyond that, but he decides to hide her until he can get her back safely to South Korea. The thing is, it really got everything. It has romance. Some of it is very moving. Good. It has humor. Now, some of it is a bit hokey, but it's so good-natured and appealing. I forgive it all. It's got some thrilling moments. And it also has an element that's like, if you've ever seen the HBO series Succession.
No.
Which is about the competing siblings who do nasty things to try to get control of their family.
I've heard about it. I've never seen it.
It's very good, I think. I mean, not many likable people in it, but it's very good. Yep. This has that element also, but it's so I think it's terrific. And actually, it's insanely popular. It's been viewed by 30 trillion people in Asia. No, not true. It's had 1.75 billion views, which surpassed the record previously set by Mr. Sunshine. But don't hold it against it. Still give it a chance. There's another series that's German, and this one is not unlike The Bureau. And it has 3 seasons. The first one is called Deutschland 83. It takes place in 1983. Then there's one, Deutschland 86, and then Deutschland 89. The difference, one key difference between this and The Bureau is that its focus is on the bad guys, the Foreign Intelligence Agency at Stasi.
Okay.
And so in the first season, they cover the recruitment of an undercover agent and deploying him in West Germany.
Oh, I've heard about this. Yes.
Yes, it's really good. And in 1986, the DDR is desperately short of money.
Yep.
And so they try all sorts of measures to raise cash, like selling the blood of its citizens, right, and dealing in contraband armaments. And Deutschland 89 covers the collapse of the wall and of East Germany. So it's available on Hulu, all 3 seasons.
Okay.
And only the first 2, I think, only the first 2 are available also on Sundance Now. So that I recommend. And that's
Great.
my report.
Great. Thank you, Roy. I look forward to catching up on those. I'm still behind. All right, Andrew.
Hey, Ron.
Hey.
I'm going to make an effort to say you're on. You said the other day, you made a comment that caught my attention about virtue signaling, and your thought on it was that it's being used incorrectly, at least, or overused, maybe, used to mean the wrong thing, and basically said that it's more about virtuing. People are signaling to themselves more than other people, and I'm trying to kind of integrate that with another point that, like, you didn't really expand on it, so I'm going to ask you to expand on it so I can get what you mean more. But I, not necessarily disagreeing with you, but I do think there's still a serious issue. I mean, just, you know, like when Rand wrote The Fountainhead and presented Peter Keating, and second-handedness and people seeing themselves through the eyes of other people, that supports the kind of conventional way people use virtue signaling. So can you just maybe expand on what you meant?
Sure. I mean, I think they're both true. So there's no question that people are second-handed and they want to show the rest of the world that they're being moral. But that assumes that people don't care about their own morality. And I think to some extent, I think that's wrong. I think people have a moral code and they care about their moral code. And they want to, at least sometimes, not all the time, because that's inconvenient, but sometimes at least live up to their moral code. And I think they get not quite pride, because these are anti-value, it's an anti-value morality, but in some sense, they pat themselves on the shoulder because, hey, I did my little altruistic duty today. So I think there's too much assumption that morality is external and not internal, that it's coming, that people have not chosen a particular morality, or people have not allowed a particular morality to embed in their soul. And therefore, we're in some sense giving them a free pass. No, these are altruists. And when they do something altruistic, part of it is, this is the right thing for me to do. And part of it is, yeah, hey, people, see, I did the right thing. It's both. And I think we live in a culture where we don't want to give personal responsibility, where we don't want to, we think people are determined by their environment and their genes, and we give short shrift to their own values, their own thinking, their own choices, their own free will. So in my view, it's much worse, because they hold these ideas. They really believe in this to some extent or another. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. I mean, it's interesting, because my first reaction was, I think Yaron is projecting his own independence into a lot of other people, where there really are trying to signal to other people, like, approve of me, you know, because I'm doing this. Yep. And but I see exactly what you're saying, and I also think that it's a little hard, because you don't know how much of it is that and how much of it is somebody actually, because they're announcing it, you know, they're announcing it to other people. It's like, it's not really evidence either way. I do think people announcing things, and we kind of live in a culture with social media where there's neurotic announcing going on.
Sure, but people use
everything.
People use virtue signaling not just on announcement. They use virtue signaling when somebody does something. Virtue signaling now is anytime somebody does anything related to morality or says anything related to morality, it's virtue signaling. That's the thing I'm opposed to.
Yeah. And I think that I started thinking, like, particularly with some of the more influential people in society, you know, it's a little bit of a disparagement to them to say they're just doing it to signal to other people when you don't really have the evidence for that they may have real commitment to wanting to be a good person and doing the right thing.
Yep.
And, people are accusing them of virtue signaling. So I definitely do get that angle of it. You did cause me to think more about that.
Yep. Okay, good. Thanks, Andrew. All right, Reed. You muted.
How's that? Thanks. First of all, I want to second that motion about Leonard's radio show in Los Angeles. I was lucky enough to live there then and hear those shows, a lot of those shows live, got to call in a couple of times, and had a tremendous influence on me and helped me to understand objectivism a lot more than I did going into the 90s. And so it was great. And I'm very distressed to hear he has COVID. I didn't know that. And my question is a COVID question. You did a really good show on the vaccine, why it should have been free market and how well it would have worked free market. But my question is now, under the current healthcare system, would you agree that the age 70 and over and other vulnerable people under 70, that population, that they should be vaccinated first after these medical personnel?
No.
And if so, wouldn't that solve the problem of death? And you had talked earlier about protecting the vulnerable people. Isn't this the way to do it now? And that solves the problem of death and hospital overload and all that stuff.
It's going to take a long time to do, though. So, because there are a lot of people, particularly if you include obesity and diabetes and heart disease and all the pre-existing conditions under the same thing, it's going to take a lot of, I think it's much easier, for example, to vaccinate the people who are exposing COVID to these other people. So, for example, caregivers at all kinds of what do you call it?
Nursing homes.
Nursing homes, but all the different levels of nursing homes, right? There's some, communities where older people live, like in California, these whole towns really of just older people who live there. If you vaccinated them, you could vaccinate them very quickly. And they're the ones who are most likely to give it to older people. If you vaccinated people working at supermarkets, grocery stores, places where older people still have to go, you would reduce this faster. So I think if you're looking at fast, you want to vaccinate all the people who tend to, because senior citizens mostly can just stay home. Right? It's the people who supply them with the food and engage. Those are the people, if you vaccinate them, they touch many, many senior citizens all at once. Now, all of these are kind of utilitarian calculations that are very difficult to do, right? I think you'd have to be a professional epidemiologist and a statistician to figure out who should we vaccinate first to reduce the impact of COVID, right? And that's a scientific question more than anything else. I think that if you actually one thing we could do, which I think would speed everything up, is in addition to the government giving out vaccines, let the private sector buy some and distribute them. Let people who want to buy them, as long as it's not coming out of this pool that the government has. So the more options, the more dynamism you create in the vaccine market, the better off it's going to be.
Yeah, but the supply is so short.
Well, but the supply is so small because there's no price competition.
Yeah.
And why is AstraZeneca not being allowed to be given in the United States when it's being given in the UK and in Israel and in Europe? Why is the FDA holding it up and they said they won't release it until April? a vaccine that's been approved by the European. Why can't the FDA just say, if the Europeans approve that they use the same kind of standards we do, we'll approve it too. And the Europeans could say, if America's approved it, we'll approve it too. The whole thing is a charade. The whole thing is it's just a travesty. The immorality of it all is just stunning, and nobody seems to care. Why don't we allow people to take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which requires only one shot, does not require refrigeration at these incredibly low, because the FDA hasn't approved it yet. But okay, so I'll do it to volunteers if they're willing to do it. I take it just to get over with this frigging thing. So it's just frustrating because there are a million ways to do this better than it's being done. That's my view. I can't imagine a worse way than the way it's being done right now. You know, I talked about this yesterday. They're literally throwing out vaccines in New York because you're not on the list.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you're not on the list, they would get fined $1 million if they give it to somebody who's not 85 and older, healthcare worker, you know, on the list of people who can only get vaccines right now. In Israel, and Israel's no model for anything usually, but in Israel, as soon as they finish their list and they've got some vaccines left over, you know what they do? They go out into the street and they drag anybody who's interested into the thing to get a shot. It doesn't matter if they're 16, it doesn't matter if they're 72, it doesn't matter if they're 55. Hey, people, we've got some extra vaccines. Or they call up their relatives and they say, call up all the other relatives and bring them all over and we'll vaccinate you. They don't let one drop of vaccine be thrown away. I mean, there is the story of the pizza guy being vaccinated in Israel, but my wife's entire family's been vaccinated, 2 shots already, not because they're in the risk group, but because they got to benefit from some excess vaccine. So it's just, everything about this is, if there was a model of why you don't want the government to do anything important in the marketplace, this is it. What's going on with the vaccines right now is it. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Reed. All right, Daniel.
Thanks, Ron. Also, looking back at some of the older videos, you mentioned that it was good for you if people left Patreon and went straight to your website to support you. Is that still true? You still feel that way?
Not as much. I mean, I'd like at the end of the day, if everybody gravitated to my website, it would be better because it would be easier to manage. Okay. But at this point, there's still about 100 people on Patreon. And there's still people now on Subscribestar. Now there are people on Locals, and then we have about 300-400 people on my website. So it is what it is. So it's not crucial anymore.
Okay, good to know. I hadn't heard you mention it in a long time, so that's
why I don't, because okay. Sorry to beat this COVID one into the ground, but I guess I'm going to. I hear the argument again and again that the problem with COVID in the US is that Americans are basically immoral, that we know what to do, which is mask, socially distance, and live like hermits. And we won't do it. You know, we're just too selfish, and that's the real problem. And, you know, somehow I have to ask, is it the problem that Americans are immoral, or is the problem that the moral code that we've accepted says don't question the authorities that say mask and separate yourself is the way to do it? Don't look at countries where test, trace, and quarantine has worked. You know, just accept and sacrifice your life as living in a first world country, and you know, do what the authorities say, what scientists and politicians have to say. I mean, are Americans immoral, or have we accepted the wrong moral code? No, it's the wrong moral code. It's that we won't question demands for sacrifice. We won't question demand for sacrifice. Now, some of us do question it. And do go out and do try to continue living, and then people accuse us of not living up to their moral code. And some people feel guilty about going out and living because they buy into that moral code. But the problem is the moral code. And it's not just Americans. I mean, look, if America was the only one who saw spikes in COVID, but what would be one thing you could say, okay, Americans are misbehaving, but it's Germans, it's French. France is a disaster. It's the UK. We know what's going on in the UK. It's Holland. You know, those nice Dutch people. COVID is out of control over there. It's Scandinavia. You know, maybe to a lesser extent for whatever reasons. I don't know. Maybe they used to more social distance. Who knows? I mean, COVID. One of the things we still don't know a huge amount about COVID, and it's fascinating. And the postmortem on this whole thing is going to be really interesting. But yes, nobody is interested in solutions. Nobody's interested in ideas. Nobody's interested in what the Taiwanese did, or even what the South Koreans did. They're interested in authoritarian means and sacrifice. Sacrifice the young to the old. Sacrifice businessmen to whomever, and of course sacrifice future generations for the current generation by printing money as if there's no end to the printing press. I mean, just throw money at people because there's no cost to it. So it's all about sacrifice. Altruism is everywhere, and some people stand up to it in their day-to-day behavior not because they have a different moral code, but because they just can't tolerate the sacrifice anymore. And they're the ones being accused of not being moral, not being good citizens. But yes, it's the morality that has to be questioned.
And the result is we've got this new strain supposedly coming that's much more contagious.
Because
and they're saying, hey,
so long. The longer we wait with vaccinations, the longer we wait to suppress this, the longer we wait with test, trace. Although testing and tracing is too late now. The number of cases has overwhelmed the tracing capability of any country. But because we waited, because this has taken so long, the virus is morphing, it's evolving as was predicted. And one strain, the British strain, is more contagious, but the South African strain might be more deadly and might be resistant to the vaccine. So we're in deep trouble unless somebody gets their act together. But it doesn't look like anybody is. And again, it's not just the US, as much as I'd love to say we're the only country screwing up. I mean, when I look at the rates of vaccination out there, we're ahead of almost every European country except the UK. Yep. France, Spain, Germany is way behind us.
Yeah.
Way behind us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, guys. All right, I'm going to take a question here. All right, it's a little long. Johann Norberg states that the Homo sapiens have been around for 300,000 years, living as a tribal, emotional society. And it's only been during the last 200 years that we have lived in a widespread system of rule of law, widespread economic growth that has lifted most people at the same time. And that we've had rapid technological innovation. During those last 200 years is when we've gotten all of our health, wealth, and lifespan, pretty much. But that's not where we're getting our attitudes and belief systems and instincts. Those are coming from previous 299,800 years. Most of Homo sapiens' existence has been a zero-sum game, and that is why the majority of people are still tribalist and emotionalist. Since man has free will, is his statement valid in that our species has lived so long as emotional tribalists that it will take a long time for us to evolve into our full rational potential? I mean, yes and no. It's not right in a sense that of biology. It's not right that the tribalism, emotionalism, and collectivism are coded into our genes. They are things that we must do. It is true, though, that we live in a society that is to a large extent conditioned by the 299,800 years in its stories, in its belief systems, in its religions. And those have a profound impact on all of us, whether we like it or not, whether we try to resist it or not. They have an impact. You have to really fight it. Most of us read Ayn Rand at whatever age we read it, in my case, 16, and we spend the rest of our lives fighting it inside ourselves, not just out there. It's hard to get rid of all the crap that our culture and our society embed in us, both when we're children and when we're grown up. It's all around us. So Leonard Peikoff once said, and he, which is very much echoes this in some sense, which, I didn't understand at the time, and I still don't know that I understand. I mean, he basically said the human race is not ready yet for Ayn Rand. We're too immature for Ayn Rand, right? Now, what does that mean, right? We've got free will. Anybody can choose it. But the effort to engage your free will, not just engage your free will, to engage in free will in questioning everything that society and the people around you are telling you. Everything. From the role of government in politics, to marriage, to the role of sex in human life, to morality, to the role of religion, to reason, to, I mean, most of us manage to do some of that, maybe most of it, but it takes enormous efforts and most people can't. This is why real cultural change is slow. It evolves, not in the evolutionary sense of biology, but in the sense of slow cultural changes. I mean, you get this a little bit in DIM, in Leonard Peikoff's DIM hypothesis. Let's make up numbers right now. Imagine there are 100,000 objectivists right now in the world. I don't know if they are, but that's my working number. I don't think all 100,000 completely have the philosophy integrated, but so the 100,000, let's say. How do we get to dominance? We get the dominance when some of those 100,000 become artists and start conveying these ideas through not mediocre art, not what do you call it? Hitting over your head, sledgehammer art, but real high quality aesthetics art. So that the culture starts, when we're young, we start being exposed to beautiful things, heroic things, things that have deep meaning that does not fit all this other stuff. Imagine if some of those people become physicists and start explaining some of the theories of some of the quantum mechanic type stuff in ways that are rational, connected to reality, in ways that we can all understand and comprehend, and other physicists and other scientists can understand and comprehend. And imagine we have educators who actually start teaching kids and start educating kids and start conveying the kind of material and the kind of values that are important to convey to children. And people in all kinds of professions are doing their thing, right? And slowly, incrementally, even if there's nobody actually teaching objectivism, slowly, gradually, the culture will get better because it'll be exposed to better stuff. It'll know more through learning history and math and science and all this stuff. It'll have scientists who are not crazy and not caught up in nonsense and in mysticism or in the non-reality of things, or what is multiple dimensions, or whatever the latest nonsensical thing that the physicists come up with. But they're connected to reality and can communicate that. And slowly the culture is ready. And then at some point, maybe there's some philosophers articulating objectivism, and now it makes sense to people. And that's the evolution that needs to happen. It's a cultural evolution. It's an evolution of the way people are educated, the art that they're exposed to, the kind of people that they meet, the heroes that they have, the successful people and the kind of messages they convey. Imagine that the people who are successful in our culture, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, I don't know, the people who developed the Moderna vaccine, whatever. Imagine if all of them were hailing the value of reason and individualism and capitalism. The people wouldn't have to be objectivists to be more oriented towards objectivism just by the fact that their heroes, the people who are successful in the culture, are talking in that language. So when we come and say, oh, here's the philosophy of individualism and reason and capitalism, they go, oh, okay. Steve Jobs said something about capitalism. That's a good thing. Right? So that's what has to come. The 100,000 objectivists that exist today have to be successful. They have to be successful in their own lives more than anything else. And then when they're successful, they have to be willing to say, yeah, and this is why I'm successful, because I use these tools. That is how you change a culture slowly. And it's the only way to change a culture. So think about, and I know I'm going long here, but think about the Enlightenment or the founding of America. The founding of America isn't a revolution in the sense that one day people woke up and said, oh, freedom, liberty, let's do that, right? It starts with Thomas Aquinas, bringing reason into the Catholic Church, and Aristotle and reason into the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church struggling with these ideas and using and applying them wrongly and dogmatically, and viewing Aristotle in a dogmatic way, in an authoritarian way, and screwing it all up, but playing with the ideas, using the ideas. And then sometime maybe 200 years later, people starting to discover Greek sculptures. But it's not in a void that they're discovering Greek sculptures. They've already been influenced by Aristotelian ideas for 200 years. So when they discover the Greek sculptures, they're going, whoa, okay, they're ready for it. And then you get Michelangelo and Leonardo and Raphael and all the art of the Renaissance, which is expressive of free will and reason and science, because they're even doing perspective. Think about what a huge leap forward perspective is in terms of applying science to art. And all this is happening. So now, while these artists are also reading, they're more open-minded because the art has opened their minds up. And they've got this Aristotelian base, but now they're willing to read other people too, and they're reading all the Greeks, and they're reading the Romans, and they're engaged. And then there's a printing press, and books start printing, and more people get involved, and people start libraries, and people value education. And then Spinoza writes a book that says, oh, maybe God is not what all these religionists think. Maybe, in a sense, reconceives of God in the Aristotelian sense of a prime mover, if at all, and maybe says something about, should we be sacrificing? Shouldn't life be about, some maybe hints of egoism in his ethics? And a book is banned and it's smuggled throughout, and people start, this takes time. And then you get the United States after all of that, plus John Locke and the French Enlightenment and Scottish Enlightenment and all the thinkers who came in between, and all the art that's being created in between. And of course, don't forget Newton and the scientific revolution and Leonardo da Vinci. And you go on and on and on about all the pieces that led to the founding of America. And it goes back to Aquinas, and of course, that goes back to Aristotle. But it's slow, and it changes the culture. So you could say the culture evolved. People didn't evolve. The same genetic makeup in the Dark Ages, same genetic makeup in the Renaissance, same genetic makeup in the Enlightenment, same genetic makeup as today. What evolved are their attitudes, their ideas, their knowledge, their conceptions about the world, their sense of life. All of that evolved, but it evolved out of thinkers. It evolved from intellectuals. It evolved from artists. It evolved from scientists. So it required the human mind. The evolution was an evolution of a conceptual evolution and a sense of life evolution, so emotions and mind. And that's a story that I don't think anybody's told yet fully, not from this perspective. And that's the sense in which our culture is now ready. In some senses, look, think about it. 250 years after the Enlightenment, we're still Christians. God, really? I mean, how dumb is that? Right? That's easy. And that's not genetic. So there's a lot of work still to do in terms of the culture, in terms of changing all that instead of undermining the bad ideas that are out there, right? And replacing them with something. And that takes a long time. And I will emphasize this over and over again. It takes art. You can't do it without art. The Enlightenment cannot come before the Renaissance. The Renaissance makes the Enlightenment possible in a sense that it conditions massive numbers of people subconscious to be ready for the Enlightenment. And this is the problem. If you think rationalistically about ideas, you think, well, but as soon as you say A is A to somebody, as soon as they accept A as A, it's finished. You've convinced them of everything. Yeah, right. I wish. It doesn't, knowledge doesn't work that way. So the human mind is very complex and very detailed in the things that impact it. I mean, if you read Ayn Rand, she understood this. She was not, here's the principle, I'm just going to deduce and show you the truth out there. It's not how she functioned. She talked a lot about psychology. If you read her essays are filled with psychological observations. And psychology is part of what drives a culture. We do not have a psychology. People out there do not have a psychology that makes them ready for capitalism, or that makes them ready for the truth, or that makes them ready for atheism, or that makes them ready for egoism. If you told them there was no God and they should not sacrifice, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves. They wouldn't know what to think about. They wouldn't know what morality meant. Even if you taught them, they would then take you as commandments. They would say, oh, I have to be rational. Okay, what does that entail? Teach me. Tell me. And so it really is long cultural change takes all these different pieces. And until you get all the different pieces, you're not going to get it. And this is why people say, oh, Atlas Shrugged's been out for 50, 60, 70 years or whatever. And the Ayn Rand Institute's been doing this for so many years. Why hasn't the world changed? This is why. Because it takes a long, long, long time to change a culture. A culture. Well, Stephanie says, did Joran say we need art first? We need art in the middle. In a sense, Aristotle first, Renaissance / art second, Enlightenment third. But that's way oversimplifying because everything goes together. It's a spiral. It's a spiral. So you need constant art ideas, science. Don't forget science. Science is really, really important. It's no accident that science starts up during the Renaissance. You should read about Leonardo da Vinci and what he did. And he was a scientist and an artist, and the impact he had on the people around him. And he was probably gay and probably maybe an atheist. So he broke all the rules of the Renaissance, all the rules, and he helped shape an entire culture by him being just out there. He was incredibly courageous. He lived a very long life and was very, very visible in the culture. And he showed the world, you can be different. He was not a sacrificial, meek Christian. He was a proud, individual. All right. Christian, if you're listening, that should be its own video. That was actually pretty good. And some new stuff there, I think, from me at least. All right, we're going to do some super chats here. Is there a certain wealth level where taxes don't matter to you? Like if you had $10 million or make $1 million per year, would you be willing to absorb those 55 tax rates and stay in California? So there's no wealth level where taxes don't matter to me. But there is a wealth level where taxes matter less to me. That is, yes, if I had $100 million, living in California, I'd want to live in the most comfortable place in the world. And if I get taxed a lot, I'd be upset. I'd be unhappy about that. But that wouldn't be the thing that determined where I live. my wealth level is such that the 50% that the government takes from me is the 50% that really makes a difference, that changes my life from being comfortable to being really comfortable, to living really well, right? And that's why taxes overwhelm other considerations. But if I had a huge amount of money that I couldn't even spend and never really spend, then I'd hate the idea that the government is taking my money, but it wouldn't have make an existential difference in how I live my life on a day-to-day basis. And by the way, $10 million would not be the number. It would have to be a number higher than $10 million. In $10 million, I'm still in Puerto Rico. All right. How can you blame people for walking into gas chambers when they didn't know they were gas chambers? They had no idea what they were walking into because there was no historical precedent for death camps. That might be true for a while, but at some point they knew. At some point they knew wood spread. People knew at the very least that they were walking to their death, even if they didn't know the specifics of what they do. And look, I don't blame them. I mean, that would be horrific. I mean, they are the victim. You don't blame the victim. And I don't blame in certainly not a moral sense or any sense. I'm just saying, if I knew I was going to die, if there was no question in my mind I was going to die. I mean, you see this in movies sometimes where they line people up and they shoot them one at a time in the head and they just drop into this mass grave. You're going to die. I would want to take out as many of the bad guys as I could with me, right? So I hope I would, right? Because who knows? Because you're paralyzed at that point. I mean, a lot of people are just paralyzed at that point with what is going on. But I would like to believe that I would rage against my murderer. I would punch them. I would kick them. I would scream. I would yell. I would scratch. I would have the most undignified death possible. I would force them to restrain me and to kill me in a way but I would express to the universe, even though that's meaningless, I know, my rage at my fate and the injustice of what was going on. I wouldn't just sit there and let a bullet and take a bullet. Now, again, I'm not judging anybody because who knows what I'd actually do when the time, if that ever happened. But that's how I feel about it today. That's what I think I would do. That's what I want to think. That's what I want. That's what I think and want to do in a case like that. That's what I wish more of these people did do that. And they did in some places. And they did in some occasions. They broke the line and ran and they were shot in the back, but at least they ran. They did something, right? But imagine rushing to the guard and taking his hand grenade and blowing yourself up with him. I'd rather do that than have him just take me out. What did I just do? Yes. Why is the person who takes the last piece of pizza always blamed as opposed to the people who took all the other pieces? And why is the player who scores the last point credited with winning the game? Well, because the last piece of pizza is selfish. It's yours. You could have shared it with other people. You could have sliced it up. You could have let somebody else take it. I mean, it's just an expression of self-interest. In sports, self-interest is acceptable. It's the one realm why I like sport. One of the reasons I like sports. It's the one realm in which, yeah, you're supposed to win. And there's no apologizing about winning. So the player who wins because he made the last shot is celebrated because it's unabashedly self-interested in that sense. Players go on the court to win. That's it. They want to win. They're not going to sacrifice. All right. Somebody says, thank you for the Mr. Sunshine recommendation. My pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it. Why do Americans only accept altruism when it comes to money taxation? When it comes to gun rights, Americans are biggest egoists in the world. That's why the left has given up on gun control, but not socialism. I don't know. I mean, guns are, a mythology has been created around guns, a mythology about and connected to what it means to be an American. I mean, I get a sense that Americans would give up free speech, the First Amendment, before they gave up on their guns. So I think it has more to do with mythology. And of course, guns are not, they're a tool everybody understands. It's I don't know. It doesn't impress me that Americans will not give up on guns when they're willing to give up on everything else. They're willing to sacrifice pretty much everything else. I think that shows a certain weakness in Americans. Any news on Dr. Peikoff? Yeah, I mean, I talked to him. I think most of you know he's in hospital. He's got COVID. He's had COVID for a while now. He's stable, at least last time I heard, which was, I guess I haven't gotten any updates today. No, here's the update. I did get an update today. So he's getting better. He's getting better. So he's definitely, he might go home soon. So he's over the really difficult part. He's over the really risky part where you really, really worry. And we were very, very worried. And there's a chance he'll be going home, sometime early next week, early in the week. We'll see. Who knows? But Leonard Peikoff has COVID. And I spoke to him yesterday. He sounded, completely alert and great on the phone, usual sense of humor. And we talked for, I don't know, about 10 minutes. He did start coughing towards the end of it. And he said at the beginning of the talk, I can't talk for long. And if I start coughing, I'm just going to hang up on you. So he didn't just hang up on me. He said goodbye, but it was nice to talk to him. It was nice to hear his voice. So I think it's good news. I think it's good news. I think there's a good chance. I think he's getting better, and he's getting good medical treatment. He's getting all the best treatment in a sense of all the different protocols for COVID. He's getting the best across the board, and I think that's what I will say. I have forwarded the messages some of you sent me. I have forwarded them to Kira, his daughter, and she will read them to him. Is narcissism the necessary consequence of a primacy of consciousness metaphysics? No, I think there are a lot of, I don't think narcissism is any of these is necessary, right? So a primacy of consciousness metaphysics can manifest itself in lots of different ways. It can manifest itself as is in complete second-handedness, in complete emotionalism, but it can also definitely manifest itself in narcissism. I think narcissism is, anybody who's real narcissist is also a primacy of consciousness. Not everybody who's primacy of consciousness turns out to be a narcissist. There are other forms it can take that, When I used to use the word selfish in a negative way, it was only when someone was being inconsiderate and self-absorbed, not someone rationally achieving goals over time or someone predatory. But that's not how the culture uses it. So they certainly call Steve Jobs and Bill Gates selfish. Anybody who's profit-seeking selfish, right? Even though they're rationally achieving their goals. Selfishness is a package deal of both, of the rationally achieving goals and of these other things. So when you use it to denounce the people who are self-absorbing and inconsiderate, you're even if you don't mean it, in the eye of in the ear of the listener, in the mind of the listener, you're also condemning the businessman, the selfish, so-called selfish businessman. It's a package deal. And you have to undo the package deal. And there is two legitimate things that are in this package, right? One bad and one good. But if you mix them together, even if in your mind it's clear, in the people out there's mind, it's confusing and distorting. Without Section 230, could you sue for posting something that at the same time sued for not posting something? Without that protection, would not the platform be paralyzed? I don't know about not posting something. You could be sued for posting anything that the writer could be sued for. So you would be sued together with the writer. What Section 230 says is, if I write something that's defamatory towards you, you can sue me as the writer, but not the platform like Twitter and Facebook on which I posted it. If you did away with 230, you could sue the whole chain of command, if you will, the whole chain of holding it. So, but if I don't know if the poster could sue for you not having posted. That I don't know. I'd have to think that through. Again, thank you for our generous Norwegian supporter. That was very generous. And hopefully I'll see you in Norway. And as you say, hopefully you're coming to Austin this year and that'll all happen. Austin is where Ocon is this year in the late summer. All right. How did Rand have an opinion on fantasy literature? Did Ayn Rand have an opinion on fantasy literature? Harry Potter, stories like that, stories that use the fantastic to illustrate a point about human nature, or is it a virtue to bring ideas down to actual reality? I mean, I don't remember. I think she did say something about it. I mean, certainly, I think it was in the context of science fiction, maybe, but she certainly, I think, thought that it was a greater achievement and more important and more relatable and more influential and more emotionally connecting if it was brought into the world we all live, rather than a world that we can't really relate to, that doesn't really exist. So, yeah, I mean, so I think she did. I don't think she dismissed fantasy, or she would dismiss fantasy, but I think she would view it a higher art to be able to bring it into the world that we live, in a sense, right? In the context in which we live. So I wouldn't dismiss fantasy or science fiction or any of those. Okay, quickly, I'm going to do these quickly. There's a lower dollar amount. Let's see if I can do it quickly. Is it wrong to place transgender in female prisons? And when will you be on Jordan Peterson's podcast? I'm sure he would have you on. I mean, if Jordan Peterson will have me on, I'd be on tomorrow. I mean, I'd drop everything and be on. So email Jordan Peterson and ask him to have me on. I'd love to be on. I'm going to be criticizing him tomorrow on the show. I'm going to on about romance and about a relationship. But I'd love to be in Jordan Peterson's show. It will expose me to a huge audience. And so you guys can write Jordan, encourage him to invite me on. Are meter maids and the entire ticketing apparatus in American cities pure fascism? No, I mean, you can imagine meter maids in a rational capitalist society where the roads were private and there were certain rules that the private owner placed on parking, and he would charge you for the parking and therefore fine you for if you violated those rules. So no, I don't think that. I wish it was privatized, but I don't think that is an example of fascism. There are like a million better examples of fascism in America. I actually, of all the things cities do, things like toll roads and meter maids are the least offensive, because at least they're trying to raise money, off of your use of something. So you're paying for a service. It's the closest we would get to some, rather than just taking a bunch of money out of my paycheck or penalizing everybody. Even I'm the only one who uses a particular service. Oh my God, we're getting super chat questions. Enough, can't do anymore. It's 2 hours in. We're done. So a few of these, we got two, well, I have to do reses because it's a lot of money and I owe res because
you're just too popular.
Just too popular. People are throwing money at me. All Australia has proposed new regulations requiring Google and Facebook to pay for publications on their platform. To pay for publications on their platform. Google and Facebook are fighting back by threatening to remove the Google search engine and Facebook from the country. Let's hope they do that. I mean, that's fascism. That's an example of fascism. Australia doing that. Australia, during this COVID, is really misbehaved. Really, my opinion of freedom in Australia has dropped significantly. I thought it was freer than it turns out that it is. But that's horrible. That really is. Okay, hasn't America actually given up on the Second Amendment? The people are supposed to have enough firepower to maintain a free state. That's far from true today. Yes, and if that's the meaning of the Second Amendment, if the meaning of the Second Amendment is enough firepower to launch a revolution, then I'm not a supporter of the Second Amendment. I'm just not. I support your ability to have arms for self-defense, not to launch a revolution. Anyway, I have a whole spiel on that. You should ask me when I have more time why I'm opposed to the idea of militias. And I mean, I think it's ridiculous in a modern world. What, my neighbor would have an F-15, I would have a M60 tank, and who's going to have the nukes? The guy down the road. So no, I am not for unrestrained militarization of individuals. Do you like stand-up comedy? I think it serves a necessary function. Fiction of naming the elephants in the room of our society and making it easier to discuss sensitive topics in an entertaining way. Thoughts? Yeah, I agree. I think comedy is hugely valuable. All forms of comedy, from movies to stand-up to skits, Saturday Night like stuff. I think all of those are absolutely valuable, and valuable partially for the reasons you talk about. Being able to talk about things we're usually embarrassed or afraid to talk about, being able to talk about in an entertaining way. It's also just fun and entertaining and good to make fun of and laugh at the ridiculous and the bizarre in the world. All right, let's try to get these done. Is there a difference between A is A and A equals A? I don't know. I don't think so, but I can see why A equals A is not quite as strong. It seems to be narrower, and I can't say why off the cuff. A is A says A is A. Everything about A. Now, maybe A equals A, but A equals is a mathematical term, is a more metaphysical term. So I think equal is too mathematical. That's why I go with A is A. That's the answer. A is A. A equals A means, yeah, if you put a number in A, that's 5 equals 5. A is A means the entity that is A is that entity and nothing else. Okay. Have you ever been to Australia? Yes. I did a talk there years ago. Loved it. Really liked it. And on the way back, also visited New Zealand and spent a week in Bora Bora. So it was a fantastic trip. And yes, I'd love to come back to Australia. How do they say? If you build it, they will come. I think in my case, if you pay me, I will come. That is the bottom line. If you pay my speaking fee and we can arrange a bunch of talks and it justifies the trip and it's enough money, then I would be happy to come. And if anybody's interested in inviting me to Australia and wants to know what that would cost, email me, yaron@yaronbookshow.com. The science is still out on whether the vaccine prevents the spread. It's possible you can still spread it after vaccination. Possible, but significantly less likely. We have to deal with, it's a probabilistic thing. The probability is that it doesn't spread, or it doesn't spread as much. And therefore, it's worth going all in on the vaccine at this point. What alternative is there? Saw a tweet from Mental Health Resource saying self-care is not selfish. Very sad that they can't see the contradiction. Self-care, not selfish. That is a huge contradiction, but it's because they have this distorted sense of selfish. They probably have a distorted sense of what self-care means. Okay, last question. Can you comment on state legislatures considering legislation making political discrimination on social media illegal? Yeah, I mean, I considered that. a massive violation of free speech. What next? I mean, I'd like to be able to throw you out of my store if you wear a Nazi symbol. I don't want to serve you. Or even better, if you're a communist, I want to be able to not deal with you if you're communist. You're out. I don't want to have anything to do with you if you're communist. Well, but that's political opinion. I can't discriminate against you. I can't discriminate against communists. And now Nazis. So it's a massive violation of the social media's free speech rights. What about Islamists? Would Islamists now get free reign on social media? Nazis, communists? It's just, let the market sort this out. Let the market sort this out. Let them fight among each other. All right, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for the amazing contributions. This was a very lucrative super chat. Thank you for all of my supporters who are here with us live and got an opportunity to ask a live question. And I will see you all tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be talking about romance, happiness, and Jordan Peterson. His view on those. So bye, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day tomorrow.